On May 24, 2024, conservation biologist Ugo Vercillo received a photograph that almost seemed impossible. On a branch in the dry Caatinga of Bahia, Brazil, two young Spix's macaws were standing side by side, being fed by their mother, as if this bird had never vanished from the wild. But the truth was very different. The Spix's macaw had been officially declared extinct in the wild in 2019, after years of surveys failed to find a single living bird. What made that photograph even more remarkable was that the parents of those two chicks had not been born in the forest. They had hatched in a facility near Berlin, Germany, grown up in captivity, and were later brought back to Brazil and released into a landscape where their species had been absent for more than 20 years. A bird that seemed to exist only behind cage bars now had chicks born in the wild. But how could a species that had disappeared for so long return, survive, and breed in such a harsh land? The Spix's macaw did not disappear because of one single cause. This blue parrot had always lived within a very narrow range, mainly in the hot, dry Caatinga of northeastern Brazil. It depended on the gallery forests along the São Francisco River basin, especially old catabaeta trees with deep hollows inside their trunks. Those hollows were some of the most important nesting sites the species had. When these forests were burned, cut down, and damaged by overgrazing, the foundation of the bird's survival began to collapse. But the cruelest blow came from humans. Starting in the 1960s, the Spix's macaw became a rare prize in the international exotic bird trade. Adult birds were trapped, eggs were taken, and chicks were pulled from tree cavities before being smuggled overseas. Each raid did not only remove more birds from the wild, it also erased the survival knowledge that older birds passed down to younger ones. By 1990, only one wild male remained. It lived alone in a broken piece of forest until it disappeared in October of 2000. From that moment on, the Spix's macaw was no longer a blue call in the skies of the Caatinga. It became a species kept alive only behind cage bars. If you were facing this crisis, would you save the forest first or gather the remaining birds for captive breeding? Leave your answer in the comments below. When the Spix's macaw existed only in captive facilities, the situation was still far from safe. At that time, only about 70 individuals remained in the entire world, scattered across different locations. A population that small can easily fall into an extinction vortex, because the fewer birds there are, the weaker the gene pool becomes, the harder reproduction gets, and the lower their resistance to disease becomes. Without a scientific breakthrough, this bird could have vanished completely, even from captivity. That turning point came in 2008, when researchers identified the virus linked to a dangerous disease that had been causing many parrots to waste away. From that moment, health screening, disease control, and population management became much clearer for the Spix's macaw. At the Al Wabra facility in Qatar, Cromwell Purchase and veterinarian Daniel Newman began rebuilding the breeding program from the genetic level. They were not simply trying to produce more birds. They had to decide which individuals should breed with which partners in order to preserve the most valuable bloodlines. Artificial insemination techniques were developed specifically for the Spix's macaw, giving genetically important birds a better chance to contribute to the next generation. By May of 2013, the first chicks produced through artificial insemination had hatched. These were not just new lives. They were proof that the species might escape the genetic bottleneck closing in around it. After years of carefully managed breeding, the captive population had grown to more than 170 birds by 2020, opening the door for their return to Brazil. In 2020, the plan to bring the Spix's macaw back to its homeland entered a new stage. 52 birds were flown from Germany to northeastern Brazil on a private plane. For a species that had been absent from Brazilian soil for decades, this was not just an animal transfer. It felt like returning a lost piece of the Caatinga to the place where it once belonged. The birds were taken to Curaçao, Bahia, the historic range of the Spix's macaw. There, the conservation team built a U-shaped flight training enclosure about 47 meters long, placed near a Caatinga forest. Inside this space, the birds had to practice flying longer distances, rebuild their muscles, strengthen their endurance, and slowly adjust to the hot, dry conditions of the wild. But being able to fly was not enough. Because they had grown up in captivity, they did not know how to read the danger signals of the Caatinga. So scientists introduced blue-winged macaws, a native parrot species, into the same flock to act as guides. The Spix's macaws could watch them find food, react to birds of prey, choose resting spots, and move as a group before finally being released into nature. On June 11, 2022, the first 8 Spix's macaws were released into the Caatinga alongside 8 blue-winged macaws. Then, in December of that same year, 12 more Spix's macaws were returned to the wild, bringing the total number of released birds to 20. At first, the research team considered anything above a 30% first-year survival rate a success, but the actual result reached 58.3%. What was even more surprising was that the birds did not scatter chaotically as many had feared. Most of them stayed connected as a flock, remained near the release area, and began forming pairs. In late 2023, the first Spix's macaw chicks in more than 30 years hatched in the wild. Even though they did not survive for long, they proved that the species' breeding instincts were still alive. By March 2024, 3 more chicks had been born, and 2 of them survived long enough to leave the nest. But that success still was not enough to call it a complete recovery. Scientific models showed that without continued annual releases, the wild Spix's macaw population would almost certainly disappear again. At least 20 new birds need to be added each year for the wild flock to grow and eventually sustain itself. The problem is that the program was stalled by political conflict. After an organization transferred several rare birds to a private zoo in India without Brazil's approval, the cooperation agreement was terminated, and future releases were suspended indefinitely. Meanwhile, the remaining birds still face predators, feral cats, power lines, drought, and the decline of the Caatinga forest. The Spix's macaw has returned, but its future is still more fragile than ever. If you found this story incredible, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below.